Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I have a review to do for you, which is kind of exciting for me. This knife is one from the Cut Club box, and I've got to put this in the mail today because I'm leaving on a camping trip. Today's Saturday when I'm filming this. I'm not sure when this will go up, probably in a couple of days, but I'm leaving Monday morning at like 5 a.m. to drive all the way up to Northern California for a camping trip with my buddy. And he's meeting me down. He's in Oregon, so it's kind of a halfway point. We're going to be camping in the redwoods and doing some fishing. And anyway, since I have to mail this out today, I wanted to do some reviews of a couple of knives in here. Specifically, mostly knives that I've had, and so I can already speak from experience because I've carried them, cut with them, owned them, but I no longer have. My knife collecting habits, if you haven't caught on yet or watched any of my videos where I describe it, I tend to sell knives, even knives that I love, just so I can keep fueling the hobby and keep trying new things. To me, I don't have an unlimited source of funds to dump into buying knives, so in order for me to afford new stuff, oftentimes I just have to sell existing parts of my collection to make that happen. And this is the Spyderco Drunken. I got one of these probably a year and a half ago, maybe just a year, I don't know. It's been a while, and I owned it for probably 2 or 3 months before I sold it. And it's a knife that I was really excited to get. When I got it, I quite liked it. I was actually very fond of it, and ultimately I literally only sold it because I just wanted to keep trying new things. And so it's one that there's knives that I've missed more than this one, but I have missed it. It's been one that I've thought a number of times would be cool to have again. And so it's fun to get to experience one in the Cut Club box and just kind of have it for a few days and play with it and scratch that itch a little bit, and now it's almost time to send it off again. But this is one of the nicest models that has come out of the Taichung factory for Spyderco. You can see we've got that kind of somewhat typical on these high-end Taichung Spydercos. The blade finish is this like high polish stone wash, and it's got this kind of smoky finish to it while still being really shiny. It's a really cool finish that they do there. And it's S90V, and we've got a carbon fiber show scale with a titanium lock side, a titanium clip which is specific to this model, and you've probably heard, if you've watched other videos on this knife, that clip is kind of garbage, and I will echo that. But ultimately, this is a really interesting model for Spyderco. It's a Sinkovich design, and Dmitry Sinkovich has designed quite a few knives for a number of manufacturers. I know he's done work with ZT, I know he's done work with Spyderco, who else? I don't know. I've seen quite a few of his designs over the past couple of years, and his designs can be a little bit hit or miss for me. Some of them I love and I'm drawn to. Other ones aren't quite my style, but that's fine. And I think it's cool that he has a wide enough variety of knives that he's designing that I don't love or hate all of them. I think that's kind of cool when a designer can have a wider net that they're casting out there. So this one, when I first saw, and I happen to have one right here, when I first saw this knife, I believe it came out around the same time as the Spidey Chef. And you can probably tell just by looking at these, I'm not the first to say this, but they look remarkably similar to each other. Especially, let's go lock side, so it's not carbon versus titanium. But the Spidey Chef is a knife that I've reviewed and that I quite liked. And it's interesting because part of why it took me a long time I didn't even get a Spidey Chef. I borrowed my brother's, but part of why I haven't bought a Spidey Chef since having this is because in my head they're kind of interchangeable. It's kind of like I already owned the nicer one. There are certainly some differences between these models. I'm sure there's already a video out there comparing the two of them. I'm not going to make that video. I don't have the time while this is in my possession, frankly. But I just think it is interesting how similar these two knives really are, even down to the blade shape. I mean, different, but not by much. So the materials are wildly different. The finishing is wildly different. This just kind of feels like a very scaled up Spidey Chef to me. It's not focused on being corrosion resistant. It's not in the salt series or anything like that, but I think you get what I'm saying. Anyway, this knife has a number of features that really make it stick out compared to all of the other Spydercos that I've owned. And I've had a number of nice Taichung Spydercos. I have a couple of Taichung Spydercos currently. I've got the Kapara. I have the Danger Pickle, which I'm actually carrying today. I've had the Paysan. I had one of these. What else have I owned? I've had the Sage 5. I don't know. I've had quite a few Taichung Spydercos at this point. And I've had at least as many, probably quite a few more, Golden Colorado Spydercos. And this one just has the highest number of intricacies to it. There are so many subtle but impactful little features on this knife that I just really, really dig. So the first things first, the blade. I already talked about the finishing, but it is a really impressive finish. I've heard a lot of people rave about this finish on a number of the high-end knives that come out of Taichung. But it's also ground really, really well. It's not stupid thin behind the edge. It feels like a pretty reasonable thickness to me. It feels about the same thickness behind the edge to me as like my PM2, which is going to be very functional. And when I compare it to knives like the Paysan, this is way thinner behind the edge. I feel like sometimes on Spyderco's ultra high-end models, they kind of let go a little bit of their focus on cutting performance, which is part of what I love so much about the brand. And like my Paysan was a super fun knife, but this is definitely a better cutter. So take that for what it's worth. But yeah, the blade shape too, I like sheep's foot blades. That's what I would consider this. And it's kind of interesting because it's almost like you still see some of Spyderco's quintessential leaf shape that you get in a lot of their blades, but it has that sheep's foot where it just comes down there. The edge around the hole is nice and smooth. It's not overly sharp. All of the edges around the spine are very smooth. Even where we've got some jimping, it's really knocked down on all of the corners, not just on the sides, but like the actual cuts for the jimping itself as well. So this jimping is some of the most pleasant that I've ever used. It's really more of kind of an indexing point. I guess it gives you a little bit more traction there, but not much. It's really just kind of tells you that's where your thumb is supposed to be, and I like that. The ergos of this knife, while I'm talking jimping, I think that's probably a natural next place to go. The ergos are really good for my hands. I like the way that this handle is cut. Instead of having like one dramatic finger groove, the finger groove kind of takes my front three most fingers, and then my pinky lands on this flat behind it. And if you had bigger hands than me, I imagine this would probably still be pretty comfortable for you. I think it's a neutral enough handle shape while still having some dimension to lock you in, that it makes a lot of sense to me. And then the way that it's curved back here as well to set my palm into, the way it rests into my palm just feels really natural, and it locks in. It locks in really, really well. I don't feel like this knife is in any danger of sliding forward out of my hand or backward so the blade comes into my hand. Like that's just, it doesn't feel like it's going to happen. There's enough of a guard up front that I feel protected that way, and then the natural shaping just, it's locked. It feels really, really good. I like too that they did kind of a full backspacer here, or 3/4 backspacer, I guess. It feels nice in the hand. They've integrated the lanyard hole or tube, whatever you want to call it, into that, so it's not in the way of clip placement or anything. Maybe they would have done this clip better if they had to get around a lanyard tube, because this is a terrible clip. But nonetheless, it all feels very good in hand. The clip itself, because it rides so tight to the body of the knife, largely doesn't like bother me in hand. In certain grips, I do notice now and then though that the very tip of it, where it just kind of sticks up right there, can be a little bit sharp. It's not like an egregious hot spot, but it doesn't feel great the way that clip terminates. Yeah, something else about the ergos that also speaks volumes of those little details that I was mentioning is the milling that's done on these scales. If you can see, so first of all, this carbon is gorgeous, and it's got this shaping to it where you can see it's not contoured. It's a little bit more like geometric than like round contouring, but it's got these angles on it, right? And then on top of that, the actual like the finishing, the surface, instead of being like peel ply or something like that, this is the Drunken milling pattern, which, as far as I remember being told, is actually a Sinkovich specific pattern. He uses it on some of his customs, from what I understand. And so you can see it mirrored on the titanium side. There's these actual like little almost ripples that have been milled onto the titanium and the carbon fiber, and they're a little bit like seemingly kind of random. They like have this it's not just a consistent wave. They have different shapes and ripples that go through, and it just really looks good. I think he calls it the Drunken pattern because of that kind of randomness, but it looks great, and the way it feels in hand, it's one of the better carbon fiber finishes I've ever experienced. For the amount of grip it gives is in no way rough. It still feels very smooth, and this feels largely like a gentleman's knife to me, but it's got enough grip that for the utilitarian aspects that this knife is capable of, it's a great level of texture that they've put on it. And the fact that it looks great in addition to being so functional, it's really well done and well thought out, in my opinion. Let's think beyond that. The hardware on this knife is really pretty great looking, in my opinion. The kind of almost matte deep blue that they've done on this titanium pivot, which is matched to the back spacer, and we've got it on the opposite side of the pivot and then on the clip. It's a really nice color, and I like the way it contrasts with the rest of the knife. I do wish that they had done the same, if they had done titanium hardware and matched that same color, it would just be all the better. It bugs me a little bit that we've got titanium pivot, clip, backspacer, all that, but then the screws are still just kind of this satin. It seems less finished than it would otherwise, but that's a small thing. One thing as well that I should mention is on the carbon fiber side of this knife, the show scale, there is a nested steel liner, and it's got some weight reduction in it, not a ton, but I don't think you're going to be able to see in there. I'll try in case. Yeah, I guess you can see that a little bit. There is a nested liner. It's got a few holes drilled out of it for weight reduction. But the real thing is, I hope you can pick up on that a little bit. On the titanium, the lock side, the internal milling on this knife is bonkers. It is extensively milled out, even on the lock bar itself, which is crazy. Even underneath the actual cut that allows the lock bar to have this tension and travel and bend, even on the underside of that cut, there's a shallower pocket. Like everywhere that they could remove material here, they did. They weren't like, oh, we can only remove a little bit there, so we'll skip that spot. Even the spots where they could just remove the tiniest bit, they took the time to do that. So the level of machining that went into this knife, I think, is just the most impressive thing to me. I've owned a number of knives that have exceptional machining, but this one, the intricacy of the internals and the finish on not only the titanium but also on the carbon fiber, which is a totally different density. I imagine machining that same exact pattern in two different materials like that has got to be more difficult than just doing it in two titanium sides, right? And all of the chamfering, the angles, the fact that it's got this kind of geometric chamfering to it or contouring, it's really, really impressive to me. I like it quite a bit. And the carbon fiber is done very, very well. There's no voids, there's no gaps, there's nothing happening here that shouldn't be. And it comes through really, really well. It's one of those knives that I think the overall profile of the knife isn't something that I consider classically beautiful at all. I think this knife, many people would probably consider kind of ugly. And before I was into the knife hobby and before I was into Spydercos, definitely, I probably would have fallen on this knife is ugly. But it's a knife that from afar I think is okay looking. It doesn't bother me, but it's a little different, and it's not a knife that I would draw if I was drawing like a design that my brain would deem as cool, right? but I appreciate it. I don't dislike it. And then when I get close to it, my goodness, it just, the inherent sensation of quality when you feel a knife with this level of detail work is really, really something. It has an effect. And even when I had mine and I would show it to people, like to my dad or my brothers or buddies of mine who aren't necessarily as into knives as I am, but people who appreciate knives, even if they didn't like the design of the knife, it's one of those that they could be like, wow, like you notice them turning it over in their hands and looking at different spots on it and just kind of geeking over the technical execution of it. It's really, really impressive in that way. I guess the last thing I should mention, I've hinted at it a few times, but the pocket clip. This pocket clip is bad. It's plain bad. I know people who, like when I had mine, I was working an office job, and so I wasn't usually in like thicker pants. And if I was in thicker pants, I just wouldn't carry this knife because it sucks. If your pocket material is thick, it's a bummer to get in and out. The tension on the clip isn't crazy. It's not that it's too tight. It's just much more so that the gap between the scale and the clip is tiny and almost non-existent until the very end here. And even there where it's widest, it's not a big enough gap. And so I know some people rebent theirs when they got these, and that supposedly helped. And I know a lot of people have also just gotten aftermarket clips. Like I know Adam Purvis was making quite a few of these for a while. I assume he still has the capability to make them, if I had to guess. But don't hold me to that because I'm not Adam Purvis. But yeah, if I were to get another one of these, I would absolutely just get an aftermarket clip for it. The bummer is that it's such a unique clip. It's just this knife. So it's not like I can go on Lynch Northwest or MXG Gear or any of the typical aftermarket clip providers that have for regular Spyderco models. I would have to buy a custom one, which is much more expensive, and I'm not usually much of like a dressy clip kind of guy anyway, so that's the real bummer, is like I wouldn't necessarily prefer to have like a Timascus clip on here, but most of the custom ones that I've seen, that's kind of what you're dealing with. Anyway, it's just something worth mentioning because the clip it's a bummer. If you're in slacks, then this knife will carry quite well, in my opinion, and I've experienced that. Like I've carried it to church a number of times back when I owned it, and it was great in a suit. And in fact, it feels gentlemanly enough that it really kind of excels in that kind of role. If you're somebody who's wearing thinner material pants a lot, then you'll probably love this knife, and you'll find that you don't necessarily even get why everyone's complaining about the clip. But if you're like a thick blue jeans kind of guy, or I wear a lot of like not khaki, but like chino material shorts and pants, if that makes sense. My thicker ones, they don't like this clip. So it is what it is. It also lands kind of right where the lock bar cut is, where it's kind of meeting the material, and so it can hang up in there. It's just a poor clip design at the end of the day. I really wish they had gone a different direction with this clip, and even the angle of how it lands onto the lock bar. I think it would have been better if instead it came up this way and landed here. I don't know. I'm not the knife designer. Maybe there's a reason why they did that, but I don't know what it is. Anywho, I guess the last thing I haven't really mentioned much is the action. This is a Spyderco with an action I like but don't love. It runs on washers, not bearings, and it's funny, before I got mine, I heard a number of people compare it to the Sebenza. It's kind of a hydraulic, glassy but resistance the whole way kind of action, and I agree. It is a lot like the Sebenza. The advantage to me that this has over the Sebenza is that it's a Spidey hole, and I prefer holes to studs, and so I like it better than that. But compared to other Spydercos, it's not the most fun to fidget with. Like, it's not very drop shutty. I mean, if I give it some wrist, I can flick it down, sure, but compared to other knives I own, and even like my Shaman or my PM2 knives that are also on washers and are just a compression lock, like this just has too much tension the whole way from the lock bar pressing on it, or I don't know. It's not my favorite action, But it's good. And if you're the kind of person who appreciates a hydraulic action, which I do not, but if you do, then you'll probably like it quite a bit. I've heard a lot of people rave about the action because they like how hydraulic and smooth and glassy it is, and that's just not the type of action that I personally prefer. So, I guess that'll pretty much be it. I really like the Drunken. I wouldn't mind one day having another one in my collection. It's if I get to a point where I can financially just buy more knives without selling as many, if I got another one, it might live in my collection. But the reality is it's an expensive knife. These are not cheap. And even on the secondary, they're still pretty expensive. So when it comes time to trim the fat in my collection, oftentimes it's what gets carried the least and can I get the most money out of to pour into new knives. And this is one that, because of the pocket clip, doesn't get carried that much, and because it's expensive, can get a lot of money back. And so that makes it an easy target when I'm thinning the herd. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get another one eventually. Time will tell how long it'll stay if I do. But it is a knife that I really appreciate, and sincerely, the technical details that are at play here are just really, really impressive. And so if you haven't checked one of these out, I definitely recommend it. I think if you're somebody who appreciates Sienkiewicz designs or appreciates the fine Spyderco knives that come from Taichung, then this is one that is worth experiencing. It is really different from anything else I've experienced from Spyderco. Even the Spidey Chef, which it looks remarkably similar to in its size and proportions and shape. But yeah, that'll be that. This is the Spidey Chef, this is not the Spidey Chef, this is the Drunken. I just said Spidey Chef right before that, so my tongue got tied up. Apologies. It's a Drunken.